The Sinclair mansion gleamed under the October moon, its marble facade reflecting the glow of 1,000 fairy lights strung across the gardens. Inside, the grand ballroom buzzed with the elite of Chicago's high society. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic rainbows over polished parquet floors, and the air was thick with the scent of orchids and expensive perfume. Waiters in crisp white gloves glided through the crowd, balancing trays of champagne and caviar canapes. A string quartet played Vivaldi, the notes weaving through the hum of laughter and clinking glasses. Everything was perfect, or it was supposed to be. Jonathan Sinclair, the patriarch, stood at the center of it all, a man whose presence commanded the room. At 55, he was still imposing, with silver streaks in his dark hair and eyes that could cut through pretense like a blade. His fortune, built on real estate and tech investments, had made the Sinclairs a household name among the city's elite. Tonight's gala was his annual charity event, a showcase of wealth and philanthropy that drew politicians, CEOs, and socialites eager to bask in his orbit. His son, Nathan Sinclair Jr., leaned against the fireplace at the edge of the ballroom, a glass of vintage champagne in hand. At 27, Nathan had his father's sharp jawline, but none of his gravitas. His tailored tuxedo couldn't hide the restlessness in his posture, the way his eyes darted around the room, searching for something to anchor him. He'd grown up in the shadow of his father's empire, handed every privilege but never the responsibility to match. Tonight, he was bored, and boredom made him reckless. Marisol Vega moved through the crowd with practiced invisibility. A maid. In the Sinclair household for 3 years, she knew how to blend into the background. Her black uniform was starched to perfection, her dark hair pinned neatly beneath a cap. At 24, Marisol had dreams beyond scrubbing floors, but her family in Mexico depended on her wages. She carried a tray of empty glasses, her steps silent, her eyes lowered. She'd learned early that the rich preferred their help to be unseen, unheard, unacknowledged. As she passed a group of laughing guests, Nathan's gaze landed on her. He straightened, his lips curling into a half-smile. Something about her caught his attention, maybe the way she moved, or the flicker of defiance in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. He didn't know her name, but he knew her type, the kind of person who existed to serve people like him. And tonight, he needed a distraction. The gala was in full swing when Nathan noticed a silver knife missing from the dessert table. It was a minor thing, part of an antique set Jonathan had imported from France, but its absence irritated him. He scanned the room, his eyes narrowing. As they fell on Marisol, who was clearing plates nearby. She looked suspicious, he thought, though he couldn't say why. Maybe it was the way she glanced at the table, or the slight tremble in her hands. Or maybe he just wanted to feel important, to prove he could command attention like his father. Nathan strode over to Jonathan, who was deep in conversation with the senator. "Dad," he interrupted, his voice loud enough to draw eyes. "We've got a problem. One of the knives is gone. I saw that maid over there near the table. She was acting strange." Jonathan turned, his expression unreadable. "Which maid?" he asked, his tone calm but edged with steel. Nathan pointed at Marisol, who was now across the room, refilling a guest's glass. "Her. The one in the black uniform." Jonathan's gaze followed his son's gesture. Marisol froze under the weight of their stares, her tray wobbling slightly. The room seemed to quiet, the music fading into the background as guests turned to watch. Jonathan stepped forward, his presence parting the crowd like a wave. "Miss," he called, his voice carrying across the ballroom. "Come here, please." Marisol's heart pounded. She set her tray down and approached, her head bowed, her hands clasped tightly. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan stepped closer, emboldened by the attention. "I saw you near the dessert table. A knife's missing. Care to explain?" Marisol's eyes widened, a flush creeping up her neck. I didn't take anything, sir. I was just clearing plates." "Don't lie," Nathan snapped, his voice rising. "I saw you. You were hovering around that table, looking guilty." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Guests murmured, their whispers like knives of their own. Marisol's hands trembled, but she forced herself to meet Nathan's gaze. "I swear, I didn't take anything," she said, her voice cracking. Jonathan raised a hand, silencing the room. "Enough," he said, his eyes locked on his son. Nathan, are you certain of what you saw? Nathan hesitated, the weight of his father's scrutiny unnerving him. I think so. She was there. It had to be her. Jonathan's jaw tightened. He turned to Marisol, his expression softening slightly. Miss, what's your name? Marisol. Vega, sir, she replied, her voice steady despite the tears pricking her eyes. Miss Vega, did you take the knife? No, sir, she said firmly. I would never steal. Jonathan nodded, then turned back to Nathan. You've made a serious accusation, son. Without evidence, you've humiliated this young woman in front of everyone. Is that how I raised you? Nathan's face reddened, a mix of embarrassment and defiance. But she was there. Why are you defending her? Because she's a person, Jonathan said, his voice low but piercing. And because you're wrong. You jumped to conclusions without proof, and now you've shamed her for no reason. The room was silent, the tension palpable. Nathan opened his mouth to argue but stopped, his shoulders slumping under his father's gaze. Jonathan pulled out his phone and dialed the head of security. Find that waiter, the one with the earring, and bring Miss Vega back inside. Now, Marisol stood on the steps outside the mansion's service entrance, clutching her gloves in trembling hands. The night air was cool, but she barely felt it. Her mind replayed Nathan's words, the way the guests had stared, their whispers cutting deeper than any knife. She'd worked tirelessly for the Sinclairs, keeping her head down, swallowing her pride. And now, she was accused of theft, her reputation in tatters. The security guard approached, his face kinder than before. Miss Vega, Mr. Sinclair wants you back inside. Please. Marisol looked up, her dark eyes shimmering with fear and disbelief. Am I fired? She asked, her voice small. No, ma'am, he said gently. You're owed an apology. She followed him back to the ballroom, her steps heavy. The guests parted as she entered, their murmurs following her like shadows. Jonathan stood in the center, Nathan beside him, pale and staring at the floor. Jonathan's voice cut through the room, clear and commanding. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, a mistake was made tonight. The accusations against Miss Vega were false. We've identified the true culprit, a temporary waiter who's been handed over to security. He turned to Marisol, his expression sincere. On behalf of my family and myself, I offer you my deepest apologies. You didn't deserve this. Marisol nodded, her lips trembling. She wanted to speak, to say something defiant or graceful, but the words wouldn't come. The weight of the evening pressed down on her, and she could only manage a small, thank you, sir. Then, unexpectedly, Nathan spoke. His voice was shaky, barely audible at first. I'm sorry, he said, lifting his eyes to meet Marisol's. I wanted to prove I could handle things, like Dad. But I messed up. I humiliated you, and I was wrong. Please forgive me. The room held its breath. Jonathan, caught off guard, said nothing for a moment. Then he stepped forward, placing a hand on Nathan's shoulder. In that silence, there was more meaning than any speech could convey. News of the incident spread faster than wildfire, igniting Chicago's gossip columns and social media. By morning, the story was everywhere. Sinclair Air falsely accuses Maid at gala. The headlines painted Nathan as a spoiled rich kid, Jonathan as the noble patriarch, and Marisol as the wronged heroine. For Marisol, the attention was a double-edged sword. She was reinstated with a raise and a formal apology, but the stares and whispers followed her everywhere. She felt like a spectacle, her life dissected by strangers. Nathan retreated from the public eye, humiliated and angry. He avoided his father, spending days locked in his penthouse, replaying the night in his mind. He'd wanted to prove himself, to show he was more than Jonathan Sinclair's son. Instead, he'd exposed his own flaws, his impulsiveness, his need for validation. The waiter, a temp named Ryan with a history of petty theft, had confessed to stealing the knife, hoping to pawn it. Nathan's accusation had been a shot in the dark, and it had hit the wrong target. Jonathan, meanwhile, grappled with his own guilt. He'd built an empire, but at what cost to his son? Nathan had grown up with everything: private schools, luxury cars, a trust fund, but no purpose. Jonathan had been too busy amassing wealth to teach him accountability. The gala had been a wake-up call, and he wasn't sure how to fix it. Marisol returned to work, but the mansion felt different now. Her colleagues treated her with a mix of pity and respect, and she hated both. She wanted to be invisible again, to do her job and go home to her tiny apartment, where she could dream of a future beyond service. But the incident had changed her, too. She'd seen the power of truth, the way it could shift the world around her. She wasn't sure what to do with that knowledge, but it burned inside her. Then, unexpectedly, Nathan spoke. His voice was shaky, barely audible at first. "I'm sorry," he said, lifting his eyes to meet Marisol's. I wanted to prove I could handle things, like Dad. But I messed up. I humiliated you, and I was wrong. Please forgive me." The room held its breath. Jonathan, caught off guard, said nothing for a moment. Then he stepped forward, placing a hand on Nathan's shoulder. In that silence, there was more meaning than any speech could convey. Weeks passed, but the incident lingered like a stain. Marisol noticed subtle changes in the Sinclair household. Jonathan was kinder, checking on her during shifts, asking about her family. Nathan, when he appeared, was quieter, his arrogance replaced by a brooding uncertainty. But there was something else, something Marisol couldn't quite place. She overheard whispers among the staff, rumors of financial troubles, of deals gone wrong, of secrets Jonathan kept even from his son. One night, while cleaning Jonathan's study, Marisol found a letter tucked inside a drawer. It was addressed to Jonathan from a law firm, mentioning a sensitive matter and a missing associate. Her curiosity piqued. She read further, her heart racing. The letter referenced a woman named Elena, who'd worked for Sinclair Enterprises years ago and vanished after uncovering irregularities in the company's accounts. Marisol's hands shook as she replaced the letter, her mind spinning. Was this connected to the gala, to Nathan's recklessness, to Jonathan's fierce defense of her? She began to watch Jonathan more closely, noting his late-night calls, the tension in his voice when he spoke to his lawyers. Nathan, too, seemed haunted, his eyes hollow as he wandered the mansion's halls. Marisol wondered if he knew more. Then he led on. If his accusation had been more than a mistake, perhaps a desperate attempt to shift attention from something bigger. Marisol's suspicions grew, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the Sinclair family was hiding something. She started asking questions, discreetly at first, speaking to older staff members who'd been with the family for decades. One, a retired butler named Henry, hinted at a scandal from years ago. "There was a woman," he said, his voice low. "Elena Marquez. She worked in accounting. Found something she shouldn't have. Then she was gone. No one talks about it." Marisol tracked down Elena's sister, Carla, who lived in a modest suburb outside Chicago. Over coffee, Carla revealed that Elena had been investigating discrepancies in Sinclair Enterprises' offshore accounts when she disappeared. "She told me she was scared," Carla said, her eyes wet. Said Jonathan was a good man, but there were others, people above him, who'd do anything to keep their secrets. Marisol's heart sank. She liked Jonathan, admired his integrity, but now she wondered if his apology had been a performance, a way to protect his empire. She confronted Nathan one evening in the mansion's library, where he sat staring at a glass of whiskey. "Did you know about Elena?" she asked, her voice steady despite her fear. Nathan's head snapped up, his eyes wide. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," she said. "I found a letter. Your father's involved in something, and I think you know what it is." Nathan's face crumpled. "I didn't know," he whispered. "Not then, but after the gala. I heard things. Dad's been meeting with people, shady types. I think he's trying to fix something big." Marisol pressed him, and Nathan confessed what he'd overheard. Jonathan was entangled with a group of investors who'd used Sinclair Enterprises to launder money. Elena had discovered it and threatened to go to the authorities. Her disappearance wasn't an accident. Someone had made sure she'd never talk. Marisol knew she was in over her head, but she couldn't stop now. She confronted Jonathan in his study, the letter in her hand. "What happened to Elena Marquez?" she demanded. Jonathan's face paled, but he didn't deny it. "You don't understand what you're getting into," he said, his voice low. "Walk away, Marisol, for your own safety." But Marisol wouldn't back down. "You apologized to me, said I deserved justice. What about Elena? Does she get justice?" Jonathan sank into his chair, his shoulders sagging. He told her the truth. Elena had been silenced by his business partners, not him. He'd tried to protect her, but he was too late. The guilt had haunted him for years, driving him to be better, to make amends through charity, through moments like defending Marisol. I couldn't save her, he said, his voice breaking. But I can save you. Leave this alone. Marisol didn't know who to trust, but she knew she couldn't stay silent. She contacted a journalist, handing over copies of the letter and everything she'd learned. The story broke days later, exposing Sinclair Enterprises' ties to corruption. The fallout was swift: arrests, lawsuits, the collapse of Jonathan's empire. Nathan, devastated but determined, stood by his father, promising to rebuild their legacy honestly. Marisol left the Sinclair mansion for good, using her savings to enroll in community college, pursuing her dream of becoming a social worker. The scandal had changed her, given her a voice she never knew she had. She visited Carla, sharing what she'd done to bring Elena's story to light. "You gave her justice," Carla said, tears in her eyes. Jonathan faced trial but cooperated fully, exposing his partners to lighten his sentence. Nathan took over what remained of the company, vowing to make it a force for good. He wrote to Marisol, thanking her for forcing him to confront his own flaws, for showing him what courage looked like. Years later, Marisol attended a charity event, not as a maid, but as a guest. Jonathan, now a free man, approached her. "You changed everything," he said simply. "Thank you." Marisol smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "Sometimes," she said, "it takes a mistake to find the truth."